Welcome to the Au Jus. I'm your host, Beefloaf. This show is being powered by From the 108 and FromThe108.com, where you can get all of our content top to bottom, blogs, podcasts, and videos, including the world-famous Sunday Soak. You can also get all of our merch there as well, including the infamous Wave Sucks and hashtag 108 in garb. Currently, we have a Wake Me for the Parade koozie selling at FromThe108.com. It's $5. Go get one, go get 10 of them. It's the kind of thing that'll never go out of style, especially if the White Sox are in a rebuild. The show is powered by you, the loyal 108 supporter. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to tickle the undercarriage in the process. Like, comment, and turn on notifications. And most definitely super chat, because that's how we get paid, and that's how we continue to make the content you know and love. Tonight's guest. Ooh, a lot of binging and bonging there. He's a charter member of the Sox On 35th crew, serving as the editor-in-chief of the website. He's also currently upset by this out-of-focus picture that I used for tonight's image. Jordan Lazowski, welcome back to the Au Jus, my friend.
Maybe on the third time we'll get a photo where I'm in focus or something. Maybe, I don't know. Like,
that's the bit. That's the bit. You know, I didn't use anything like this, all right? I didn't use any internet memes on you or anything. I used your actual picture. You know, I used the Photoshop last week. I had Tom Fornelli on. I used the Photoshop that his buddies who do the Cover 3 podcast did with him. A guy who's like totally ripped, and then he just threw his head on there. And he claims that he's newly taken up golf, and so that's what's gotten him in shape. So well, maybe we'll Photoshop you next time, Jordan. Sound good?
Whatever works, but I appreciate you having me on.
Great to talk to you, my friend. So what have you been up to?
Oh my gosh, trying to avoid watching this team, I guess. I went skydiving on Saturday. That was
shit.
I did.
Was that your first time skydiving?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have not posted any photos on it yet, and I need to, because I feel like that's something you post about usually.
Yeah.
Hey, it's cool. I did it. It's for my buddy's bachelor party. So we did that. Other than, I mean, it's hard to have anything more exciting than that. I golf, I watch this team, I work, but skydiving kind of takes it all. So
yeah, I would say so. I'd be terrified to do so. Was there a major adrenaline rush? What kind of nerves did you have getting into it, Jordan? Are you the type of person who's just like, whatever, I'll just do it?
So it's weird when I tell people I did it. Like, yeah. I have always, like, everyone's like, oh, you seem so risk averse. I can't believe you did such and such. I've wanted to do it for a very long time. It's very out of character maybe for me, but I've always wanted to do it.
Okay.
I really wasn't nervous until the process, once you get up there, they're just trying to pack everyone into this plane. So if you happen to be seated on the bench, like, you can walk up and then just fall out.
Okay.
But if you were sitting on the ground, which I was, you know, you're sitting, your legs are dangling outside of the plane, and then you kind of rock. That was the moment, and I was not nervous at all. That was the moment where it's like you kind of like black out when your feet dangle outside the plane. I'm like, oh, we're doing this. Like, oh no, just kidding. But once it all happened, and once the free fall was done, you have that second, or those basically 5 minutes to think when you're parachuting down. It's like, that was really cool. There's that blackout moment for like 3 seconds. If you see my face on the video, it's like, I don't really look. I'm like, oh, we're doing this. But no, it was really, really awesome. The adrenaline rush is so cool. It's something where it's like you're just in it, and they do a really good job just like moving you through. They don't give you much time to think about it, because I'm sure everyone would take that second. But it's like, it was well worth it. If they would have sent us right back up there and said like, hey, you want to do it again? I would have been like, absolutely. It was that cool.
That's awesome. Now, is it an automatic shoot, or do they tandem jump you with someone who's experienced? Okay. Yeah. Okay, got it. Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah, they're like, hey, you can ask your instructor like steer the parachute once it goes, or like to pull it. I'm like, no, you guys take care. I'm not taking. You guys. I'm
just here for the ride.
Yeah, I'm here for the ride. Exactly.
That's awesome. And Senior Sox says, you know, what's with the curls? I mean, the guy has had long hair ever since this entire year, right, Jordan? I mean, you came out here earlier in the year and you had long hair.
I was going to say, I think the hard launch of them on Sox Twitter was with the last time I did this with you, because I didn't have the hat on.
Yeah, that's right.
But I've just, over the course of the past more than a couple months. Oh my gosh, it's been a while. But once I first started to do it, it's like, you know, just change something for the first time in my life. I always had short, just like in that photo you brought up, short, clean hair, like
high and tight, baby.
Exactly, but just trying something different. I'm enjoying it. I've gotten mixed reviews still. It's like, I have friends who are like, oh, that's really nice. You like it? I'm like, okay, thank you. And there are other people that's like, it's certainly different. I'm like, that doesn't, it looks different. Thank you. That was the point.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, appreciate you not hurting my feelings, or I guess, but I can read between the lines.
Jordan, I wanted to have you on here to talk trade deadline, and when I invited you, I wasn't sure there was going to even be a lot of White Sox stuff to talk about, but then there has been a bunch of things that have happened but between now and that time. But really, the initial reason why I wanted to bring you on is you wrote a blog about 10 potential trades that the White Sox could make on Sox On35th's website, and I've got a link to it in the YouTube so people can go check it out in total. You know, it was great reading even before the trades. It's good reading still after the trades, because just looking at the thought process and you did a few things that are interesting that are mirroring real life. So I want to give you the floor to give a high level on the article, and where did you get your inspiration for kind of some of the ideas in the article?
Yeah, so for the article itself, the idea was try and be as realistic as possible. Obviously, like, I think it's fun to explore like super. I mean, we'll talk about like big time Dylan Cease blockbusters, but I can't. I feel like precedent has a lot more in the way of rentals or guys who maybe have more understandable levels of value versus
Right.
make an article with 10 Dylan or 10 ideas. Like that's a thought process or thought experiment where it's like it's not helping me at all. I want to think this through first. I think it's interesting. And then the other big thing was, how do you maximize the talent you have? Like you think about the first time they did sort of this sell-off rebuild, part one, or whatever part one.
Yep.
You saw trades like Dan Jennings for a quad A player. It's like that's not really fruitful. That
Right.
You're just rolling dice and hoping you're going to get something out of it. It makes more sense to say, okay, maybe instead of a top 15 prospect, I add in a reliever, and now it becomes a top 10 prospect. That was kind of the thought process I had.
In top 10 in the team system. You're talking about it. In a team system. That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
So when you view it from that perspective, it was more so maximizing value or maximizing return while making sure you get rid of all the guys you have to get rid of. Like, it doesn't benefit you to keep them here, but at the same time, It really doesn't benefit you either to trade for the Ryan Cordells of the world. So how do you marry those two things together? And that's kind of how I put that together. In trade articles, I always feel like I try and err on the side of I didn't get the Sox enough versus like thinking I'm going to get the world for this.
Right, because that's what you see out there when the amateur GMs are just like sort of floating trade ideas. It's always something that the Sox could never acquire.
Right, and it's like, look at the history of trade. It's like it was the Giolito for Cartaya stuff. Like, can you find me an example where someone traded a rental who had a mid-threes ERA and got a top 30 prospect out of it? Like, if you can't, it's not going to start this year.
Right.
Like, they'll just find somebody else. And I think that was the biggest part of it, too, is just you got to do some prospect digging, certainly when you look at these teams, especially when there's so many buyers and not a ton of sellers to go along with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the marrying two players together, and that's something the White Sox did do. I was surprised to see them do it, but your logic makes sense, because you're right. The last time they sold off individual pieces, that didn't work great. And truth be told, even when they blasted a bunch of guys together, it comes to mind the Tommy Kahnle trade. They didn't do well in it, but that was the approach, right? They picked off Blake Rutherford, who at the time was a known prospect, and like, okay, it didn't pan out. But that was kind of the process there, right? Let's upgrade what we're getting now. The returns, and we'll get to those a little later on, were even a little more fruitful than that. They got the upsized prospect, and then they got usually a secondary piece that maybe is even a little more than a lottery ticket. So it's interesting that they took that approach. I'm surprised you're not dancing around. You got Corey Lee correct. Like, Corey Lee did return in the trade, and he was one of your people in there. So I thought that was interesting.
I thought that was cool. And then I saw the Mariners just got Dominic Canzone, another player from the Diamondbacks today, who I also mentioned that. I'm like, all right, so it's like I had the right ideas. Maybe the deals weren't perfect and everything. I'm like, all right, it's kind of like, I don't know. You sit back and you're like, all right, it seems like it means nothing in the long term, but it seems like you had a good sense of maybe what value were in some places versus in others.
Yeah, right. You potentially learn something from the exercise. Like, oh, okay, this does seem to be the type of approach the opposition has when they're trying to buy something from us.
Right, and it's not even just that. It's also the fact of how do you understand the game as a whole. Not everyone fans the same way,
Right.
but for me, it's important for me to be like, how do I understand the game as best I can, as the people who are in the game understand it? Because I think it's interesting to look at like, how is the industry viewing this? How is the industry doing this XYZ certain things? So when it takes the time, just you only have so many different sites that have player trait or player values, or you have your different rankings, stuff like that. I mean, you never really know that much, but you try and know as much as you can and make your best guesses based off of that, plus precedent, things like that. I think the only other thing is I don't like baseball trade values website. I'm not a big fan of that.
I don't either. I don't care for it.
So I avoid using that. But other than that, I try and use as many resources.
Yeah, it's a very esoteric thought process, because you don't know what the current marketplace is going to look like. Mm-hmm. You don't know what the individual players and how they. And when I say players, I mean front offices think about the rest of the player pool, how they view it. I mean, you'll see it on draft day. You'll see stuff follows what Baseball America or MLB Pipeline thought, and then there's some wild cards that go in there that they came out of nowhere. But you realize it's different. Front offices think differently about players, so it's interesting to try to approach, especially trade blogs. Treasy and I do a series of them at the end of the year where we try to trade off like actual players in the White Sox a lot of times and just see what the other teams look like. We do it as an exercise just to learn the other teams and try to understand where the weaknesses are in various rosters and stuff. But it is definitely a fruitful exercise. Let me get to one drink here. And it's Matt Lazowski. Says, sup nerds, Zavala rules. I feel it's a shot across the bow at you, Jordan.
I'm sure we'll get into it when we start talking about Corey League. I already have something prepared for this. Don't worry.
Wonderful. Can't wait. So one thing you did touch on in the article that was extremely interesting to me, and I tweeted at the time, and now as we're getting deep into the trade deadline. The trade deadline is actually tomorrow, 5 p.m. I think like 5 p.m. Eastern, August 1st. Is Jake Burger's trade value. You did propose a trade in here for Jake Burger. For me, Jake Burger is tough to figure out a trade value for, just because he's effectively a bat-only player, and that bat-only player is currently a slug-only player, and he's got a lot of control. I mean, he's controlled forever and ever and ever. So the question is, what does an outside team value that at? So how did you come to your realization as to making the trade in there, and what do you think about his potential trade market and value out there?
In terms of the actual trade I put together, that was what I even said in the article. I'm like, I think I probably overshot this one. Like, I picked a left-handed guy from the Padres who's really good, probably borderline top 100.
Okay.
I thought that's probably shooting too much, but I'm like, a guy who has that much control, who does one thing, but does one thing very, very well, to his credit, maybe you can extract some value from a desperate team. That being said, if you look at the totality of his trade value, you're right. That's he only does one thing, and it happens to help the White Sox so much because it's the one thing that outside of Luis Robert they don't do. So that's where we try.
And it's a sought-after commodity. So he only does that one thing, but more and more it's sought after in a game that's the league's at 23, 24% strikeout rates. Like, you need to hit the ball in the ballpark. There's the days of stringing together 3 singles is kind of like way in the rear view, unless they change something more fundamentally than just the shift about this game.
Correct. And I think it's a certain point. I think I either saw it or it came across like the idea of someone like Chris Carter. Chris Carter, who had a nice 4 or 5 year stretch, hit a bunch of homers, struck out a lot, but also walked a lot too. If he can add that third piece to it and become like the true right-handed Joey Gallo, I guess, of sorts, Chris Carter is a good first base example. Like, maybe you can more easily carve out a role for him.
Yep.
But at the same time, if he doesn't, then there are a lot of players with his type of makeup that are going to fall across the league. Yep. So I understand when it's like, yes, he's valuable. I understand why it seems to be the Sox deem him to be more valuable than maybe others do, because the Sox, his commodity or his value is a commodity the Sox don't have, versus other teams don't have issues hitting home runs because they have such issues with it. It's hard to say, hey, trade the guy who's got 25 homers on this season. But
exactly. Especially the guy you didn't plan for. It's not like you made a spot for him. You chose Hanser Alberto over him, so it was like you almost discarded him. You ended up needing to play him, and then he kind of came through and brought the power to. So it's It's kind of a weird spot.
Right. It's like, then you make the argument, okay, maybe if he walks enough and becomes that Chris Carter type player, can you squeeze him in over at first base and move Andrew Vaughn and try to extract some value there? You know, it's not going to be a lot of value, but he'll have more value than Berger probably does, because Vaughn's shown a secondary element, that walking aspect. They'll say, hey, we'll fix his attacking or something like that. We'll teach him to launch the ball more. It's harder to teach a guy to be more disciplined. If a team's going to look at, it's going to take, if you're going to take one of those two skills and try and teach an additional one on top of that, I'd rather teach a guy how to change a swing and homer than try and not swing at everything.
Interesting. Interesting. I'm going to get back to this in a second, but I want to take a drink first. Baloney says, please define esoteric for us dum-dums. Esoteric is just like rare, maybe, or not often used, kind of a skill that is, maybe not in vogue. So dreaming up trades here is esoteric because it doesn't happen day to day in baseball. So it's maybe not that valuable. Like Jordan being real good at this, he gets to do it a couple times a year, maybe, and that's it. So that's kind of what esoteric is.
Right.
One question about Berger, and then you brought up Vaughn. So I had this thought. I actually tweeted it out. Who do you think has a better chance to improve as a hitter, Berger or Vaughn? I put this up as a Twitter poll, and Vaughn actually won. However, when you look at it in context, Vaughn has almost 50, might have passed it already, 1,500 plate appearances as a professional, as a major leaguer. Berger only has about 500. To me, I would think that the guy who has less major league plate appearances, and now on balance, Berger has more in the minors and Vaughn has far less in the minors, which we're kind of all aware of, would have a shot at maybe developing some additional skills. That's sort of what you're talking about there, is like if he could develop a little bit more plate patience, Berger, the walks would come, and so also you would think it would lead to more power too, Jordan. Do you think that we're at a point where he could develop more? And are we at a point where Andrew Vaughn could still develop more?
I think either could. I truly think either could. It's what do you view as the primary thing you're trying to get out of both of those players? For Vaughn, I think it's absolutely get the ball out of the ballpark. He's shown an ability to walk, and maybe not as drastic as we maybe thought he would.
Right.
But he's shown the ability to have at least good at-bats. Berger has shown that ability as well, maybe not as frequently, but he's shown something in terms of the power department that Vaughn really never has. And when you're a first base only type profile, I know they keep trying to shove Berger everywhere. When you have a first base only profile, and you're saying what one quality do you want to start with, I'll start with power.
Right. Yes.
So I'd rather start there and see if I can teach you plate discipline. I don't think it's going to be very easy to do. I can maybe give you more information, or we can talk about the general approach you have. But it's a little bit harder to do than maybe changing a swing path and trying to get someone to think more about who already has a good sense of the strike zone, to think about changing hits to the right center gap to balls that are pulled over the left field fence. Are either really that easy when there's 95-mile-an-hour fastballs and 86-mile-an-hour sliders coming at you? No. But if I'm taking my chances, I like the idea of teaching someone to hit homers more. But if you're a team that's like, I'm trying to compete, I don't have time to teach this skill.
Right.
Like, then I'll keep the guy who has the homers, and I'll find somebody else who can be on base for him when it happens.
Right.
Like that's kind of the argument I think the Sox have to figure out is, if you're really set on keeping Vaughn, like truly set on that, there need to be some swing changes. You can't, this version of Vaughn is really not that much of a drastic improvement over Berger. Or you can look at it from the perspective of, we're just trying to extract value for the next time this team is ready to compete. I'd probably trade Vaughn, because teams are going to say, yeah, we can fix that swing path. That's not an issue. I like his plate discipline. We'll teach him how to do this, X, Y, Z things, and go from there.
He's got a little better pedigree, maybe. It's interesting. They did come out and say that he's untouchable. I think some of it might partially be because he's just having kind of a disappointing season. It's just not, he looks like a second division first baseman. You'd be selling low, maybe potentially there. You went through the exercise, Jordan. You did the article. What were your expectations of the 2023 trade deadline marketplace, and in what places were you surprised so far, and what's happened, like just broadly in the majors?
Surprised that New York ended up really, or the Mets really ended up saying we're done with this. Like,
Yeah.
We can't figure this out. We're gonna have to reset and go from there. I am really surprised they ended up doing that. I'm surprised with how many teams are really going for it. I'm glad that the Angels decided to say, "Hey, we have Trout and Ohtani. Let's actually make a run at this."
Yeah.
And go from there. I think the returns have overall been higher than I anticipated, maybe.
Yeah, just a touch. I feel the same way. Like looking at each deal, most of the deals, let's say the majority of them, I'm looking at, wow, that's a little more than I thought they could get in that spot.
And I think
squeeze a little more.
And I think that's a sense of where the market is in terms of buyers and sellers. That just there's enough buyers that someone's gonna have to cave eventually on some of these things.
Right.
And I am very surprised by that because usually I don't look back and feel as if teams really like surprise me with what they get at the deadlines. Like this time around, I feel like, oh wow, that feels like a generally good deal. Like, yeah, the Giolito one is a great example. It sucks, but that's a good deal. The Lynn one, I was surprised they got a top 10 prospect out of that.
me too, sort of, but also like there is the durability there. Like I felt like there's a finite amount of guys that you could buy, and maybe that's where it ended up being. Like.
But I'm surprised that still at the end of this day that there are teams that really need guys who haven't gotten them. The Orioles need pitching.
Yeah.
Have not really ponied up. How could you not match the Edgar Caro deal, for example? Like you couldn't match that. Maybe you didn't want them. That's a different story. But it's like you had to want one of these guys that left already to another team. So I am surprised with how some teams have dealt with it, but mostly the returns have been a little bit higher than anticipated.
Interesting. He just because his name has been out there and bandied about, Dylan Cease is being talked about now. Is kind of like, as you're mentioning, as a lot of the expiring contract trade pieces, starting pitchers have gone, and some teams are backing out of selling. The Cubs just bought Heimer Candelario a little while before we went on here, so it's looking like they're not going to sell any of Marcus Stroman or anyone that's expiring there. I talked about it last night on the Sox Machine podcast with Josh Nelson and with Treasy. But one of the thoughts I had in the aftermath of the discussion was, Dylan Cease has 2+ years of control left. The last bomb that we saw of a deal was Luis Castillo last year. He had a year plus, and he got a ton. They got a ton of stuff for him. Part of my thinking, Jordan, is maybe teams don't want to pay what would cost to get Dylan Cease for 2+ years here. And if you're the White Sox, would you be willing to stomach taking less value than he's worth just to move the overall process along in this spot? Like, he seems like a weird spot. What do you think about it?
I think you have to say, I'm sure they're doing this. Here's what we want. Here's what we'll accept. And it becomes the question of, if you feel like what you would accept is what you would get for a year and a half of control instead of 2.5 years, well, then wait, see if you can get a team who's desperate next trade deadline and try and get back up towards what you want.
Right.
I don't think it should be a situation. I'm not saying they shouldn't trade Cease. I think there's no way you're going to get this team to be competitive in the time that he's going to be here. Right. There's no way to fix this that quickly. But does that mean you have to move him right? And that's kind of what the control is for. You have the ability to use that luxury of time to make that decision over the course of the next 6 months into the off season or into the next 6 months after that, as we head to the next trade deadline. I'm not opposed to moving him as much as it hurts me.
All your guys are going.
I can't. How many more guys can I watch go at this deadline? Truly, I'm not opposed to moving him. I see that with some of the returns on the market that I would say I'm maybe more strongly considering this because of that. But I wouldn't anticipate getting desperate and be like, we need to move him. This needs to be done now because of XYZ things we want to worry about in the offseason.
Okay. Yeah, that was kind of the thought that went in my mind, because you bring up the exact point I was trying to get at. Like, if you're just going to get what you would get at a year plus, are you willing to just take that? Or maybe you're getting a little topper on that, not much more. That's probably not worth the full 2+ years, right, that you're giving up. And who really wants to barrel that much prospects? Like, it seems like The Orioles are playing it tight to the vest because, and it's similar to when those guys were running in Houston. They played it tight to the vest often, and they would wait for a deal that was really something that kind of came to them. The Diamondbacks so far are playing it tight to the vest. The Reds, the teams that are flush with prospect capital, are not the ones really kind of shoving hard. It's everybody else kind of in and around them that seem to be moving. So it's interesting to just ponder, like, if it would be possible for a Dylan Cease to move at this deadline.
And it is surprising to me because those are three teams that can't afford to do it, and they don't have pitching prospects to say, well, we'll just see if we can get these guys in the next couple months ready to go and push for that playoff or make that playoff push. The Orioles don't have Grayson Rodriguez, but he had shown he wasn't ready. The Reds don't really have anybody. These are prospect-heavy teams with guys on the position side. And they're starting to run out of positions for these guys to play at a certain point. It's a good problem to have, but when you have that problem, which is a good one, you use it to capitalize and help yourself on weaknesses. I feel like the Reds and the Orioles are the two teams who, if you're really going to do this, you would have one of those teams take him. And I think the Diamondbacks would be a nice one. I don't think they'd give up Waller. But if you get desperate enough, it's like, if you have three of those guys with top prospects, which one do you like most? See if one of them budges first. I hope they're doing that. I hope they're not just not returning calls about this. But at the same time, it's like, if you're not getting those types of names that you really, really want, I think I can wait a little bit in terms of just the return. Because somebody's going to get desperate at some point, and even if it's not now, that's what the next two seasons are for.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me get to a couple drinks here. Lazowski says, I'll pay for this answer after seeing Seward return what they can get for Cease. Yeah, I mean, that's what's interesting, Matt. Like like Jordan's mentioning, the market seems to be higher than a lot of us anticipated with the returns. And it'll be interesting to see with a little over or a little less than a full day left to go if Dylan Cease moves. So thanks for the drink. And then my man, Senor Sox, says, good stuff, guys. Those curls are growing on me.
I've gotten that a lot, too. It's growing on me as I've seen friends more and more.
Senor's being sincere. I could absolutely tell. All right, let's get into the actual trades. I want to get your thoughts on what actually has happened. Lucas Giolito and Ronaldo Lopez moved on to Los Angeles, the Angels, for Edgar Caro and Kai Busch. Other than having your heart broken because your first love of the rebuild was Lucas Giolito, what do you think of the return on this trade, Jordan?
I got one quick aside. I got so mad that night. Like, I wrote the article. Like, I wrote the article. It's like, you got to get the news out real quick. You got to go. Got it out. Sat down. I'm like, what did I just write? And it's like, for as long as I had mentally been prepared for this, when it happened, you hit submit and you post. It's like, did I just really have to write that? Yeah. So there was a lot of frustration there. The return was nice because I maintained when I was writing or whether it was tweeting, I maintained like a top 75 prospect is the absolute maximum you're getting for him. Mm-hmm. I expected the to be more in the 90 or 100 range, like still on the list, but not anywhere higher than like 90, 85. So to get a 75th, or this is by Baseball America, but a 75th ranked prospect for me felt like a win right off the bat. And I think the Lopez thing, anything time you can get something for a reliever with someone with a little bit of upside, I'm always going to feel pretty good about it. So I feel like looking at those two, I think looking at the trades as a whole, as we get into some of the other guys, or not, maybe not the trades, but the team as the whole, I guess. Yep. There's been a lot of targeting of left-handed bats that get on base, which is nice between guys like Jake Gonzalez is a great example, Colson Montgomery, and now Caro. But if you know what the problem is, why can't you develop them yourself? You know what the issue is. Like I'll give you credit for identifying it and going and trying to rectify it. But why can't you do that? What needs to change about the development system? What needs to change about the coaches we have on the development system to target those types of players in-house? So it's like,
or even identifying them accurately in the draft, right? They've drafted a bunch of lefties, but some of it's development, some of it's just eye for talent. These guys just maybe they're not that good. Like,
Colson looks like he's going to be a good one.
Yep.
Gonzalez, way too early to tell. But then to target another one, it's like, we see the issue, but where have these guys been for past drafts before that, or trades before that, or just any development in general. Like there are not a ton of those guys in the system.
Right.
Why not? And I think that's a big part of it.
It was interesting to, especially with Carroll, like he's been rushed to AA. I'm hopeful that the White Sox will be patient with him, especially the fact that he's a switch hitter, that the defense hasn't fully developed yet. I hope they really just take their time with this kid and give him a chance. Like there's a while before he needs to be on the 40 man. So let's use up that time until either he's ready or you got to launch him onto there. Like I feel like too often this group is willing to rush certain players, and I hope that they're careful with them.
Agreed. And I think that's where something like Corey Lee comes into play.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who isn't the most overwhelming return. I mean, you see something like what Seawold got today. I'm like, we couldn't have gotten more than that for a guy with control next year.
Right.
Even though it is $8 million. But so it's like, yeah, you're not Sebi Zavala, so I'll give you credit for that. You can be that as a player, and I'm going to pay attention to you. But that serves as sort of a bridge. Again, maybe this is a 2-year bridge, 2.5, whatever it ends up being.
Yep.
Here's a legitimate bridge with a prospect pedigree that provides some competition in the upper levels of the system that isn't Sebi Zavala. I think that's kind of how I ended up viewing that trade, which is like, all right, they identified their hopeful future long-term catcher, and now they have their short-term catcher. I assume is how I see that.
Yeah, that was kind of the thought. Treasy and I were talking about in the stands the other day. Like our thought is that this guy ends up on the team like very soon, like some in a month or in a couple weeks or something like that, and they make a decision here. Shortly on if Sebi Zavala stays with the group the rest of the way, or if he's out of here, and then you just bring up Carlos Perez and run with the 2 young catchers and just kind of see what you have. We'll get to a little more of that in a bit. But yeah, the Graveman for Corey Lee, I kind of thought this is short term, and sometimes you just see something in a guy and think, okay, well we could fix something here. And the Sox have not had a bad time fixing catchers in a variety of ways. It didn't work with Zach Collins, but they brought along Tyler Flowers, and he became an elite framer, and that's a little years ago. Where Carroll reminds me kind of this guy that they also brought along. His defense stunk, but he was an on-base machine. That's Omar Narvaez. They brought him along until he was at least a competent catcher, and he could be traded. So they've had some success getting these guys to the majors is better than competent. So I'm interested to see how that one turns out. The last trade of the group was Lance Lynn and Joe Kelly to the Dodgers for Nick Nastrini and Jordan Leisure. Jordan Leisure 100% is going to be in a little game we play on this podcast called Porn Star White Sox, and I'm sure we're going to get My Sox Summer off on that one. The One Way Podcast is going to be flush with that game, especially with Corey Lee's another name. Like there's some fun names in here that we can kind of trick him on. So what was your thought on the return for Lynn and for Joe Kelly?
I was surprised that it was a top 10 prospect in the system. Like I was genuine, especially a deep system like Los Angeles is. I was very surprised by that. And I think it speaks to, I think you can sell the case for Lance Lynn in a different environment than this one. And I think Joe Kelly has the stuff, despite what the numbers have said in terms of ERA. I think people are like, I don't care about FIP. I don't want to hear about this and this. Like, but teams that are making decisions do care. I know we might not, but the teams making decisions care how pitches move and how pitches do certain things. Like, if he's got stuff, we'll fix it and go from there. Like, if you don't got stuff, then I don't care. But and
those are the relievers the White Sox were able to sell. Everyone but Gregory Santos were their top guys in stuff plus. Ronaldo I think was at 125, and then Kelly was 110 or 112 or something like that. So they kind of sold the guys that, like you're saying, have stuff. Some other team is like, yeah, give me that guy with the raw ability. We'll fix one thing, or we'll limit him to this particular subset of batters, and we'll be succcevel with this guy. So it's interesting.
And I mean, in terms of the return too, Leisure is an interesting one. Again, it's doing what they should have. It feels like for so long, what they were really good at was just, hey, we're gonna target guys who are in our minor leagues, and we're gonna build our bullpen from the minors. Then this 3-year window happened where all they're doing is signing relievers for $8 to $9 million contracts. And then they decided, all right, let's go back to what we already did well and maybe place more emphasis on young guys coming up through our system as part of our bullpen. And you see
this. Yeah, it is weird, and it started before the contention window because Kelvin Herrera was in there. The trade for obviously the trade for David Robertson in the previous one, but the trade for Alex Colomé, which was Omar Narvaez, is like they were weirdly buying relievers, and like none of these wins don't matter. Like why are you getting these guys?
Right.
Just let them come up, and like they had that addiction for a while. It seems like they've gotten the methadone and maybe they're off of it. I don't know. We'll see.
Right. The biggest thing, Robertson never bothered me as much. When you're doing it for a closer, that's one thing. When you're doing it for like 3 or 4 middle relievers, I'm like, what are you doing? You need to pay one of
these guys.
Like most teams will pay 1 or 2 relievers. They won't pay 4 or 5.
Right.
So that's where it got back to like, hey, let's get back to developing guys in our bullpen. And I think leisure goes a long way in that. It's basically an 80 grade fastball, according to some people. Let's start with that and build further. Nastrini could be a nice one. 4-pitch mix, starter, back-end guy. I think between him and if you get lucky with Kai Bush, maybe you got 2 back-end starters. One of them is more of a depth guy. One of them actually makes the rotation. I don't think you can complain about that in terms of what you gave up. Now, the onus is on you to go stack the top of the rotation with either free agents or guys you develop, but you at least sort of gave the system a little bit more depth to it.
Yeah, there's at least some guys there to take the starts. Like this year, as things started to unravel, the cupboard was bare. Like you had to go on the street and get Tuki Toussaint. Now he's been good, like surprisingly good, but like you can't expect to be able to go out in the street. You should have these guys kind of lined up and ready to go. Right. And the White Sox just haven't. I mean, last year they had Davis Martin come up, but we knew behind that there was basically nothing. This year there was like talks of Sean Burke, and it's like they just drafted Sean Burke not that long ago. How's he already going to be in the majors? You know, so I'm glad that as part of these deals they did. And I'm never you should trade for need kind of guy in these situations. You just trade for the best stuff you get. But it is nice that these slot in nicely for a need that the White Sox have.
Right. I mean, your farm system's been bleeding for a little bit. Like to start to patch those holes until maybe some of the guys, I mean, they've done generally better in terms of profiles they've targeted in drafts. They've done generally better in profiles they've targeted on the trade. Again, if you compare these to Rebuild 1.0, when you were getting the Ryan Cordells of the world, that wasn't the right way to do it, to just dump these guys and get a lottery ticket. You might have to do that by this trade deadline, maybe. But at least in the largest of terms, you showed some sort of improvement in the fact that you paired guys together to get better returns versus trying to just throw out a bunch of lottery tickets and hope one sticks. That doesn't happen often enough to justify doing it.
Yeah, no, I like the approach, and I tweeted it too. I said this is the give Jared Kelly all the rest of the draft pool, draft slot money in 2020. It was like, well, let's just gamble on this guy. I know it hasn't panned out, but I like that approach better. Gamble on some upside and give yourself a shot. So marry these guys together if that's what you got to do to get the appropriate upside and the level of prospect. Do it. I like that gamble. I like to shove in like that. It seems like a better approach. I want to throw you questions. We're getting to the end of the actual trades. You know, we had this question in the Sunday Soak, which we filmed yesterday, and this is from Trey, and I wanted to give it to you, Jordan, just to see what you think about this. Trey's question from the Soak was, do you feel better about 2025 and beyond than you did a week ago?
Oh, my God.
It's a tough one. I think it's a tough one.
God. Yes and... I was going to say yes and no, but then I didn't know what I was going to say for yes. Because in theory, it's like, okay, by 2025, you still should have, hopefully, a starting outfield. Benintendi, Robert, hopefully Colas figures it out by then.
Right.
You have a starting outfield at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Infield, you have Colson Montgomery, hopefully.
Yep.
I don't know what happens in the other 3 positions. Maybe Sosa figures it out at second base if they ever let him play in the major leagues. Maybe he figures it out. Maybe someone appears at second base. Catcher, you might have Kara by 2025. The rotation, though, looks barren. I mean, Duke, who's one of our newest contributors, our podcast host.
Yeah, I saw him at the podcast the other day. I saw him and Maddie at the tailgate where the bums had whiskey at Comiskey, and I saw him. I saw Maddie. Yeah, so Sox on 35th was well represented.
Good. I wish I could have been there, but I was skydiving instead. But he's a huge fan of Michael Kopech, and we've been going through back and forth. I'm like, I don't know, dude. Like, it's not like I think he's a reliever necessarily. It's more I just don't. It was when Cease and when it was like, why do you still believe in Cease? It's like, well, he has 3 highly above average pitches.
Yeah,
like straight fastball was above average, slider one of the best in baseball, curveball above average. All right, you have 3 above average pitchers. Kopech has an above average fastball and an average slider that took a step back this year. He doesn't have a third pitch, doesn't have a fourth pitch.
Right.
That is not a profile that profiles towards the top of a starting rotation.
Right.
That's where I get worried about the long term of saying, well, then you have the next top of the rotation member in Kopech. You can sign a couple guys in the middle and maybe Kai Bush and Nick Nastrini, Sean Burke, Martin, the 4 of them figure out the back couple.
Yeah.
So I do and I don't. Like the rotation will always be the biggest thing to me because I at a certain point you have to have a true dominant top of the rotation arm. Maybe even 2 of them. And I don't see where those are coming from just yet in terms of 2025. If Cease is still here, great. But I don't see that necessarily being a reality either.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with you. We almost universally agreed in a Sunday Soak that we feel better about the returns on the trades than we thought we were gonna. Like that,
right.
But that's a minor thing compared to like the larger picture of the team actually being in better shape.
Right, like you got good returns. You absolutely got good returns, better than expected. But better than expected for rentals is still 4 or 5 starters and a catcher who may be average in terms of movement. Like, I'm sure a catcher that's fine in baseball. Being an average catcher is fine right now.
Yeah,
but it's like you didn't shoot for the moon and get these huge returns, top prospect type things. Which again, it's fine, but it doesn't move the needle substantially necessarily.
Exactly. Yeah. No. But great question, Trey. Really appreciate it. To close this out, Jordan, I want to talk about the White Sox direction from here. Right now. Specifically, I want to look at the last 2 months of the season. So I want to ask you, from a utility standpoint, the White Sox biggest commodity once we get through this trade deadline is playing time in certain spots. Yeah. How would you like to see that allocated? Is there anyone in particular that you want to see a lot of in August and September for the White Sox to help formulate an opinion on their abilities?
What bothered me the most the first couple times we've had players to talk about was that they never, when there was a clear time for them to give them an opportunity to either put up or shut up as players, they were never given that opportunity. We had to figure out what Colas was this year, and it was kind of rushed. Or in the past, just you would play veterans instead of seeing what you had as players. Like Zach Collins was a good example when he kind of teetered back and forth. The team wasn't competing, just let him play. We kind of figured out what he was long before this. Lennon Stokes is another guy where it's like everyone's like, oh, they've given him 100 at bats. They gave him 100 at bats over the course of 2 seasons. It's like, you got a guy who's 23 hitting 15 to 20 bombs in Charlotte. Like it's not a 27-year-old. That's a 23-year-old who just mashed in Double-A last year. See what he is. He might not be anything. It's not like I'm proclaiming he's going to be the next coming of, I don't know, pick a great second baseman. Like the next great coming is like, but see what he is. Because now you answer these questions that you're going to have in spring training. You're going to have the same questions. Who is this player? Who is that player? Romy Gonzalez last year is a great example. We got to figure it out that he's just an average utility player that wouldn't walk if he wanted to. We could have figured that out last year. It's like there were times and places where you could have used times when you weren't going anywhere to learn things about players. So the answer to that question, Elvis Andrus probably doesn't need to be on this team much longer. It's going to pain me. Yasmani Grandal doesn't need to be on this team much longer. Like guys who don't fit the long-term picture need to stop getting playing time and just see what you've got. Mix and match certain things. Put starters in weird or relievers in weird situations. Battle test them a little bit. I like Santos getting the closing opportunity against Cleveland.
Me too.
Like start to battle test these guys and figure out what you're going to have come next season when you're trying to, as Grafal said, establish a new culture, establish a new team, establish new leaders. Give people the opportunities to establish themselves. If you're trying to change things, don't let the culture continue to be set by guys who aren't going to be here next year. I think that's fairly universally from fans. I think the biggest difference is I'll sit here and proclaim to you that there's still a chance none of these guys are any good. Sosa might not be any good. Rodriguez might not be any good. Like Corey Lee might be Sebi Zavala 2.0. It might happen. I'd rather figure that out this year, though, than try and learn it in spring training. And then next year's Hans Roberto comes and beats out someone who deserved playing time. And then we're back in the same situation, asking these same questions 12 months from now. I think that's been one of the more frustrating things, is that every time it seems they have an opportunity to give themselves to take advantage of a shitty situation and learn something from it, they don't take it. And I'd like to see them finally take it.
White Sox Dom says Jose Rodriguez needs to play. Who are you playing at second for the last 2 months? You playing Jose Rodriguez or you playing Lenyn Sosa? Because I think if you want to find out something, you got to choose a path, and one of those guys has to be your primary there, I would think.
Sosa. We've seen more from him in AAA. Rodriguez hasn't played at AAA yet. He's kind of been in and out with injuries. Everyone just move up. Andrews, and go trade Andrews. Let him go play for competitor that he deserved. Sosa moves up and is your everyday second baseman. We can stop the Jake Burger experiment. It's fine. We can find somewhere else to play him. And then you move Rodriguez up to AAA and go from there. Like we've proven Jake Burger's a major league hitter. We don't need to fit him in the lineup so badly that he has to be the second baseman over Lenyn Sosa. Learn something new. Switch guys like Vaughn as he's dealing with injuries, or stick him at third with Moncada. Like, you know what he is. I need to figure out what other guys are, though. And we'll figure it out from there.
Huh. And at catcher, are you giving time to Carlos Perez? Is that who you would like to see kind of down the stretch? I mean, obviously catchers won't play full time, but would you like to see him catch more? Yeah,
split between Corey Lee and Carlos Perez. You know what Zavala is. He's 31 years old.
Yeah.
He's taking a step back. Like,
that's probably it for him.
He had a 400 BABIP last season. If anyone thought he was running a 400 BABIP as a catcher, you were out of your mind. Like, maybe it wasn't going to be this bad.
Right.
But at 31 years old, we've seen what it is. Like, if Corey Lee's actually a strong defensive catcher, that takes care of the Zavala side of things. Perez can be that wild card of, we still don't really know what he is. Let's see if he can be that great game caller. One of them is probably going to win the backup catcher in the team's next contention window, if that's 2026 or whatever. Let them try and duke it out for the next couple of years until you figure out what that long-term solution is.
Yeah, absolutely. Give them the playing time there. What do you think is the direction of the White Sox from here on in? So we already delve up playing time, but let's go out a little further. What do you think the direction is? What's the approach going into the next time where we're actually talking about playoff games or playoff races?
See, the problem is, everyone's like, just rebuild the rebuild. I mean, Sox on 35th has made jokes about that. Don't trust me. We have gotten a lot of use out of that. The problem is the last rebuild started from like an accelerated position because you got a bunch of top prospects because you traded Sale, Quintana, Eaton.
Yep.
You don't have those guys. Even Cease isn't going to get you more than like a Jordan Lawler or a Colton Cowser, those types of guys where it's like, those aren't, and it's not going to substantially change the direction because you're not getting a ton of pitching in return or anything like that. You don't have a ton here. So it's like,
we're not gonna bank the one time only you can find the last time you could spend on an international player, and it's one of the best international players ever in Luis Robert. We're not gonna get that spot,
right?
Again,
there are certain things that you can't start from an accelerated position this time. So I mean, technically, it took them 3 years to put a team on the field that it looked like, all right, this looks like a good baseball, like could be a good baseball team if they put it all together. Like 2020, you started to say, oh, this could be something. 2017, 2018, 2019 were lost. I feel like if you're truly tear it down, it's probably going to be longer than that. You're not starting from an accelerated position right now. You banked on this window, it didn't work, so now you gotta fix it, and you gotta do it right. You gotta do it right this time. It's like true. And another big thing of it too is like, even when they tanked, they really didn't do it right. They got like 3rd and 4th overall picks. They didn't get 1st or 2nd overall picks. Like it really didn't make a huge difference if you look at some of the players that were there. But you could have gotten Rutschman. Like that's where it makes a difference. Maybe not every draft is the same way, but you could have gotten him if you really dove into just tear it down to the studs.
Right.
I don't know what they're gonna do. I think it's hard to do that though when you have Luis Robert. I'm not trading him.
Agreed. It's hard to do when you have Luis Robert. It's hard to do when you're in the AL Central. It's hard to do when 40% of the teams make the playoffs. I mean, like, who does a hard rebuild anymore when it's right there? Unless you're a real miserable franchise, maybe the White Sox are, and you just have no hope. But I mean, like, it is tough to do that hard rebuild.
It is hard to tear it down and do it the right way. So you almost have to half measure it again. And the problem with that is you either, when you do this rebuild, retool, you have to do at least one of two. So you either need to develop really well so that you're consistently getting that cycle, or you need to spend money. It's either the Braves way of rebuilding, which is what the Sox tried to do, where they just sign all their young talent to team-friendly deals, and they just rake for 5-6 years. The problem is the Sox didn't develop well.
Right.
So then you have to do the Texas Rangers way, who spent the money because they weren't really great at developing a farm system. They've gotten some pieces, but they're not churning guys out like the Braves and the Dodgers are. So they went and spent money instead to kind of supplement those pieces they got. You have to do one of those two things. And the Sox are in a position where, well, they don't spend money and they haven't they haven't developed well. So you got to start figuring out what you're going to do from there. Like, I'd prefer them to start to learn how to develop well. That's more sustainable no matter what.
Right.
But at the same time, you got to spend the money too. So it's like, it's this weird holding pattern of, when, like you said, when 40% of the teams make the playoffs, when you're in the AL Central, and when you have Luis Robert Jr., you're not tearing it down to the studs probably.
No.
But you better figure out how to fix your development system now. Like, if Chris Getz isn't the guy, Chris Getz isn't the guy. Yeah. If Chris Getz needs to be given more autonomy to get rid of certain coaches or change certain I don't know how the organization works. Right. Whatever is preventing you from developing players well, developing the players that you're drafting and trading for, like, figure out how to fix that then. Like, or convince somebody to give up their checkbook and start writing blank checks. Like, you have to do one of those two things.
Right.
And I'd prefer the development path just because that leads to sustainable growth. And then you can spend to supplement it versus having to spend to fix your mistakes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, the development, the players that come from that are not only guys you use, but their capital and trades and that, and so it makes the lifeblood much easier. Jordan, thank you for bestowing your White Sox thoughts on the trade deadline and the future direction of the White Sox. Remember, we ain't trying to be right on this show. We're just trying to understand. You have anything you want to plug before you're going to go?
Just the usual, Jay Lazowski 14 is where you find me if you like half-baked humor. I try and be funny. I sometimes sit back, I'm like, I should try and just stick to what I know, and it's not comedy. But obviously, Sox on 35th, we're doing a ton of good work over there. You mentioned both Duke and Maddie, two newer members to what's been a long-time page. I think everyone has done a great job this season, doing the best from what this season is. Of course, I always have to shout out Joe for being the
for being Joe, baby.
Yep, just being Joe. I feel bad. I'm always like, I have to give him the credit because he rarely takes it. For fans interested in non-Sox stuff, I do help run a page called Diamond Digest. They do a ton of great work over there. That's on all the teams throughout the league. I'm very baseball centric, if you can't tell. But no, I appreciate you as always. I appreciate the work you guys do in putting together this show. And like you said, just giving fans a chance to think things through, trying to understand certain ways of thinking through things. So I always appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jordan. Take care, my friend.
Of course. Take care.
Bye-bye. That was Jordan Lazowski. That was great. That was good to talk to Jordan. The skydiving thing, that freaked me out a little bit. I'll be perfectly honest with you guys. Want to thank Jordan again. Thanks to all of you in the YouTube comments, bringing the super chats. Those very much appreciated. Next week, I'm off. All right, I'm going to be away at cottage. I'll be with Teresi, me with the family, so there'll be no au jus. In 2 weeks, I'm going to have Tony Marchese on here. He's going to talk to me about building the OnTap sports brand, which should be really interesting. So thanks again, everyone. Take care. I love yous. Bye-bye.